Well, this morning on Media and Society, after 3 journalists from 3 broadcasters got into hot water during the Senzo Mayiwa trial, we ask, do journalists know how to conduct themselves when covering court cases? We touch on the conduct of journalists during court proceedings. And with the suspension of 2 senior City Press journalists, we ask about the prevalence of checkbook or brown envelope journalism in South Africa. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Media and Society with myself, Naledi Mulo, with you for the next hour until 10 o'clock. And of course, this is the hour where we look at how the media does its job and how you feel about what we feed you. Remember, throughout this hour, we're always keen to hear your thoughts on any of the discussions that we're having, and you can do so by getting on Twitter, hashtag SABC Media and Society. 2 very big discussions today. Let's get into them. So a few days ago, journalists from the SABC, from Newsroom Africa and ENCA were barred from continuing with their coverage of the Senzo Mayiwa murder trial. Visuals show witness Tumelo Madlala being chased down court corridors for comment. This was even before he'd taken to the stand. Well, State Advocate George Baloyi told the court that journalists from the 3 broadcasters were intrusive and overbearing and left Madlala petrified. Let's look quickly at what happened in court.
My Lord, whilst we support the media coverage of the proceedings, the events of this morning, my Lord, are simply unacceptable. Yesterday, I informed the court that the witness that we arranged as a substitute witness has asked that his evidence be rescheduled, and my Lord, is precisely this type of conduct by members of the media that will, or that might imperil the state case. My Lord, intrusive and overbearing conduct by members of the media against witnesses is a cause for serious concern, my Lord. We will request that guidelines be laid down regarding the treatment of witnesses by members of the media.
On that specific point, where you say guidelines ought to be laid down, which suggests that the media is unaware of limits. I'm not sure if I agree with that kind of reasoning, because I mean, in this day and age where the media has been granted, the latitude to feature where the need arises, especially in order to satisfy the public interest. They even have formations under which they lodge, most of them. My sense is that they come knowing, and the kind of behavior you are describing would have been deliberately staged.
They are disturbing the proceedings of the court. They are known, my Lord, it's not everyone. It's ENCA, SABC, and Africa News. Those 3.
Well, the 3 reporters have taken it to their social media accounts to apologize, and the media houses they work for have been given access to court proceedings once again. But let's hear SABC Criselda Lewis's apology.
The three media houses have since apologized to the court. I must admit we might have overextended our hand in the manner in which we really tried to bring information to our viewers. And as Tumelo Matlala had been coming into court, we had followed him inside court and perhaps tried to get a sense from him what it meant for him to be inside this court so many years after his best friend had been shot and killed. And the court was very unhappy with the manner in which we had followed him inside court.
So today we're discussing the behavior of journalists in court and around court proceedings, as well as whether journalistic ethics are being followed. And joining me for this discussion, we will speak to Hopewell Khatebe, who is the SANEF project manager, but we are also joined by Dr. Sisanda Nkwala from the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, who works particularly in their media department, and she lectures media law and court and crime reporting. We're also joined by Mulusi Xulu, the founder of Donda Attorneys. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. An absolute pleasure having you with us as well. I think we are now joined by Mr. Hopewell Khatebe from SANEF. Mr. Khatebe, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time. I actually do want to start with you. I know that last night the South African National Editors Forum held the Nat Nakasa Awards. Tell us about those, because those essentially are rewarding the storytellers of the country.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity, and good morning to all listeners. Yes, we are here in Durban, and that's where I'm connecting with you. At the Radisson Blue at Umhlanga. The awards has gone to two journalists who worked for the now shut down Frame and New Frame publication, the online. So those are the two journalists, Tebe Kulu and Magnificent, who went to tell the story of Swaziland uprising, and they were caught by the police there. They were tortured and abused. So, but they eventually managed to get back home. So they told their stories and they continued to write. So that's how they were nominated, and yes, they won.
Yeah.
And the award for the community media went to Shiraj Mohammed, who did a series of stories interviewing care workers, putting his life to danger, telling the story of ordinary folks about COVID-19. So those are the two great winners of the day yesterday.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the discussion really for the morning, right? And that is journalistic ethics during court proceedings. And since I've started with you, Hopeful, I'm going to stay with you for a little bit. Tuesday's rumblings, right, within the Pretoria High Court, we see journalists wanting to get an interview with Themba Madlala. The court proceedings then becoming a discussion where even the judge really rapping journalists over the knuckles for their behavior and essentially asking them also to leave the courtroom, leaving many South Africans wondering what was happening inside the courtroom. Your thoughts when you saw that unfolding?
You asking Hopewell, me?
Yes, Hopewell, yourself, yes.
Okay. I think even as the Editors Forum, we did condemn this. It is not something that journalists should do. And we appreciate that their media houses acted very quickly, and they too responded by apologizing. But, we are in court at the behest of the judge. That's why for every court case where we go and report, we make applications. We request that the judge allows us to record, and so that we reach the public and they get to know what's going on. And the judges always tell us that this is how you're going to behave, the decorum, the courtesy, because they don't want to be to see disruptions. But also in general, we cannot be interviewing a witness before the witness has taken a witness stand and spoken to the judge and gave evidence. It is incorrect. So I think they dropped the ball there, and it was really something that could jeopardize the agreements that SANEF has made with the high courts and the magistrate courts. Many magistrates are still refusing journalists to come in. We are still fighting a case over the Zandile, Gumede, and others in Durban, where the magistrate refused that the recording should be done. So those are things that we go through, and it should not happen.
All right, Dr. Nkwala, I'm going to bring you in here as someone who lectures on media law. When you watched what we saw come out of the Pretoria High Court on Tuesday, did you see unethical behavior, or did you see journalists really wanting to do their job?
Thank you very much, Naledi. I think the interview with Griselda, for me, helped show the two issues that were at play in this situation. The first being what Hopeful has outlined, the need for journalists and journalists are taught to report with certain ethical standards on court developments and really follow particular guidelines. But secondly, it sounds like the journalists were taking an inclination to try and give the case context outside of the hours that are unfolding when they are in court. What was happening in society, what drives particular developments in society. And in them trying to get that interview from the witness, that may have been the motivation, which in and of itself is not bad, because we know what happens in court and crime cases is a microcosm of what's happening in society. But that inclination, I think, needs to really be couched in ethics, because the path to hell, as they say, is paved with good intentions. I think, secondly, just the need to be the first, the fastest to get a particular angle to the story may have driven the broadcasters in particular to be the ones, because we didn't see print, we certainly didn't see other media platforms being the ones pursuing this witness. It was specifically the broadcasters. And that may speak to this pressure to try and be in an age where traditional media is competing with social media, trying to get something that nobody else has, and that then drives a lapsing of ethics. The people who did this are not newbies. They're not junior journalists who don't know. So it seems like it was not awareness, but rather other imperatives that were driving them. And it's a great thing that we're having this conversation, because it's just a reminder of how important the role of journalists in court is, but also the risks that even those who've been doing it for years face in this new media era, where it's social media and traditional media trying to bring the information to the public.
Yeah. Melissa, let me bring you in here. Melissa Xulu, of course, is the founder of Donda Attorneys. Did these three journalists from SABC News, Newsroom Africa, and ENCA break any laws?
First of all, good morning to you, Naledi, and good morning to the other people that are invited, and good morning to the viewers. That they did cross some boundaries. I think Mr. Hatebe will know that there's a magistrate commission guideline on how the media should behave in courts, and that is to respect the decorum and the dignity of the court proceedings. So when they chased the witness who was just about to testify, it kind of affect the dignity of the court proceedings as a whole. And well, rightly so, they asked for forgiveness, and SANEF noted that, and they were banned, I think, for 2 hours or 3 hours before tea break, and then they came back again. So they did, to an extent, cross some boundaries. And for contempt of court proceedings, you can be given a fine or imprisonment. So it is something that is serious, especially in the case of such a magnitude of such a big case like the Senzo Mayor trial.
Yeah, I think Dr. Nkwala has raised an interesting point, though, and that is the responsibility that journalists have on a daily basis to tell the whole story and even to set context, and that is a requirement that we have, an expectation that we're faced with on a daily basis. So how do we strike that balance? We're going to start getting into that on the other side of this. So stay with us. We'll continue this conversation. Welcome back. If you've just tuned in, welcome back. This is Media and Society, and we're discussing this morning the behavior of journalists in court and around court proceedings, as well as whether journalistic ethics are being followed. And joining me in this discussion is Hopewell Khatebe, SANEF Project Manager. I'm also joined by Dr. Sisanda Nkwala from the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, who lectures in media law, as well as Mr. Melusi Xulu, the founder of Donda Attorneys. Remember, you can also be part of the conversation by giving us a call on 011-714-0661 or 011-714-0662. This is the second half of this discussion, and we'll be wrapping it up in this half. So make sure that you get those calls in as soon as possible. Hopewell, I want to come to you and say that SANEF has raised the issue around journalists actually having knowledge of how to operate within a courtroom, right? Is this an issue of training?
We offer training. So and in fact, what you call court reporting, it's so basic. It is journalism 101. Most newsrooms often send their journalists fresh from university or college to do training about understanding the court and being accurate and being fair, understanding the courts. So it's not the issue of training. I suspect personally that it was a matter of what if this witness says something, if I am not getting it, it was a matter of competition. They felt, I suspect, that if ENCA got it, then the journalist at the SABC will be in trouble, or that journalist at that media house will be in trouble. They dropped the ball. They just started chasing what you call the news at all costs and forgot about our own ethics and media code that you have to minimize harm. But also remember that the journalism code is also in line, it's in line with court rules. You have to respect the court. You are there at the behest of the judge.
Yeah.
So it's not training, I suspect.
Yeah, I want to come back to you now, Dr. Nkwala, and say, could further action be taken against these three journalists? Do you think that further action should be taken?
I'm inclined, Naledi, to say that the remorse demonstrates that this was really a lapse in judgment, and it really may have been driven by a desire to be the first and to be the fastest, as Hopewell suggested. So further action would not jeopardize the journalists per se, but rather their audiences and the people who rely on them providing information. So in that sense, I think the reprimand has been strong enough. Even the calls from industry have really been clear that such a contravention is not likely to happen again. But I do want to speak to this issue of whether this is simple or not. Yes, reporting on court is quite simple on paper because you're recalling what is happening in the courtroom. But it's actually very complex because we know the kind of crime-ridden society we are and how South Africans need to understand beyond the evidence presented, the factors that drive particular criminal developments. And within journalists, there's a desire to contextualize. And I think that is where the trick comes. How do you take what is going on outside court and bring it into your story with what is happening inside? And here we saw it literally happening. The witness outside of the courtroom, I think the journalist felt is free for all. So we don't necessarily need to adhere to what we have learned in Journalism 101 because this is not in the four walls of the courtroom. And we want to bring the story in its totality. And there, SANEF has got a great guideline on how to report on court and crime, but it may not really tease out the issues of how do you bring the society element in your report in a way that is ethical and in a way that doesn't just focus on adhering to the law because that is a blunt instrument, but in a way that is ethical.
Yeah. Melusi, let me come back to you and say, what do you make of the response then by the court to the actions of these three journalists, right? You had the judge essentially asking them to leave, and then they were unable to bring the public those court proceedings. And now I'm asking the question as well to Dr. Nkwala about whether or not further action can and should be taken. So, number one, do you think that response by the court was extreme? I can argue easily that the South African public feels that they have a right to that information of what was going on inside the courtroom, and that was denied to them for that period that the journalists weren't in the courtroom.
I do agree it might look as if it was a bit harsh, but at the same time, it assisted to restore a little bit of order, because after they were banned, they asked for forgiveness, and then they behaved themselves, because I think there are two constitutional provisions that were being challenged here, balancing the freedom of expression and human dignity, because at the same time, the witness, Tumelo Madlala, he also has a right to human dignity. And, you know, in one of the cases, it's not a very old case, it's a Loru and others versus, I believe it was versus Day in 2011. It said freedom of expression is not above the law. It's not superior to the law. So you must also balance that with respect to human dignity. So when the judge said, let them be banned for a while, I think it just brought some order. And this is what we saw after that. There was some order. And I think if in future, if this continues, obviously it will be a concept of court proceedings, and there will be more punishment, which is more direct than just banning the proceedings to be shown in court. So those individuals who were responsible for that, they might find themselves in hard waters, so to speak.
Yeah. Remember, we're still taking your calls on this issue. How did you feel on Tuesday when we could not broadcast the court proceedings to you because the court had decided that those broadcasters needed to leave the room after they had tried to interview the witness Themba Madlala? Give us a call on 011-714-0661. There was so much discussion about it on social media. If I come back to you, Hopeful, and I say, well, this was an infringement on the rights of the public because we want to know what was going on inside that courtroom. What do you make of the reaction of Judge Maumere? Hopewell?
I had to balance two things. One, to make sure that we understand that there are rules and guidelines, and therefore by our misbehavior, we compromised even what you call and denied. Our actions are the ones that led to our public and our audiences being denied the opportunity to listen in the courts. So it was a balancing act that the judge had to do. And I still think he was mild. He could have done worse and get people charged and arrested. I think he decided to play it fair and now as a balancing act and make us understand that who is in charge. The administration of justice has to be balanced, and it cannot only favor the audiences at home and allow us as journalists to do as we please, because we think we have a trump card of, oh no, what's going to happen to the audiences? Judge is not going to compromise that. He has to let us know. We are in court at the behest of the judge, and we have to respect the chief administrator of justice, which is a judge in this case, or the magistrate.
Dr. Nkwala, I've got just a few minutes to go before we wrap this up. But having watched this as someone who lectures on media law, what's your advice for journalists, particularly in the Senzo Meyiwa trial, but also in the many other trials that we are still seeing that are inside the courtroom and desperately want to bring us the story as fresh as possible?
I think my advice, because I am an educator, would be to fellow journalists and educators around the important. I think we've got quite clear curricula on what to do when journalists are inside court and the ethics around that. And perhaps we need to bring in the complexity of how to look at issues at a society-wide level and realize that just because there are rules inside court, what journalists do outside court is not free for all. So how do we bring that kind of education within in the journalism, the curricula, particular court and crime reporting courses? And I think with journalists really removing that pressure of trying to get the scoop. Court and crime reporting is the one place where accuracy and ethics should be at the forefront. And with the age of social media being a key instrument in reporting, that really may cause these kind of lapses going forward. So let's go back to the basics and stick to the principle of open justice, realizing that we are just there as a conduit to the public about proceedings, not interpreters, not people who are there to try and steer an understanding in a particular direction, but we are bringing the courts into people's homes, and that is really a very weighty task.
Yeah. Melusi, at the end of the day, Themba Madlala did take the stand, and we were able to share that testimony with the country. So for the most part, the country was able to get the information that they wanted. But did the actions of the journalist in any way, in your view, impact his testimony? I mean, on Tuesday, we heard the word petrified used quite a few times, with Judge Maumara saying the witness is petrified because of the actions of these journalists. Do you think that has in any way impacted on the testimony that he gave?
Yes, I think psychologically it might have affected him, and it might have made him to be, not as confident as he has to be because, of how he was harassed, so to speak. And I think also it kind of put attention on him than what he has to do, because we also needed to see, okay, we are not body language experts, but we also needed to see his face as well, to see how he reacts to the questions, because we're no longer seeing his face now. But I think it did affect the preparations, and maybe also for the prosecutor, they had to regain him. He was crying as well, so it might have touched him deeply than we thought. So I think it's unfortunate, but order has been restored. I believe that the journalists will go back to the notes on the media guidelines at SANEF website, and also check the Magistrate Commission's guideline on media access when it comes to court proceedings, and then everyone will toe the line.
Yeah, I wanna just to come back to you, Dr. Nkwala, quickly before I start to close, and I will close with you, Hopewell, but I want to come to you, Dr. Nkwala, quickly. What do you think this has done to the confidence that South African has in South African journalists?
Lady, what do I think?
What do you think this has done to the confidence that South Africans have in South African journalists?
Oh, I think this is really quite damaging with the growing lack of trust in media, news media in particular, and the conversation you're going to have after this one. Just recently, the City Press's two journalists and the issues around there. There is a sense that the public is losing faith in us. And I think actions like this sort of perpetuate that even more. I do think, though, the remorse, I think that has spoken volumes, where journalists can say we were wrong, we did not act accordingly, puts them as people who don't see themselves as being above apologizing and above correcting themselves. Yeah. So I think it has done damage, but we have acted swiftly, and I think that has been a good response. Yeah.
Well, Hopewell, I want to come back to you and say, okay, well, let's talk about the confidence that South Africans have in journalists coming out of what happened this week in the Senzo Meyiwa trial. But we'll be moving into our next discussion as well, Hopewell, and we'll be talking about two City Press senior journalists who are suspended after allegations of extortion. I mean, I'm sure you've seen that story making the rounds of journalists that have tried to that have been alleged to have been involved in brown envelope journalism. What are your thoughts on how we deal with that and how that breaks the confidence of South Africans in our journalists? Hopewell?
You're asking me, my lady?
Yes, I'm asking you, sir.
Okay, sorry. Okay. First, I was news editor at City Press, so I should declare that up front, and that I've worked with those colleagues. So to me, it's personally a bit painful, and I think it's sad. But coming back to what the Editors Forum would say on such matters, we've been fighting a negative perception since the Zondo Commission testimony by the state intelligence saying a lot of things about journalists being compromised and journalists being paid amounts of monies, sometimes have their properties, assisted or in terms of payment. It affects the integrity of the profession. It demeans everybody else who's a journalist. Think about yourself meeting the members of the public, and somebody there starts saying, so how much brown envelope do you take, or whatever it is. It will make us a laughing stock. I have a friend who works with the Johannesburg Metro Police, and he always bemoans that every time he sees people, then they sort of want to give you a 20 rand or 30 rands for food, because that's what you are. We are stopping people and they don't even want to hear whether they've committed this crime or that crime in terms of your driving abilities or whether your car is in order. We should be careful as journalists not to do something that will compromise all of us. Everybody else will be painted with the same brush as people who are corrupt to get the brown envelope. It is unfortunate. I understand that the Media 24 is investigating this case, and they will tell everybody what the outcome after this. And yeah, it is very unfortunate indeed.
Let's leave it there, Hopewell. Thank you so much for your time, Hopewell Khatebe of the South African National Editors Forum, Dr. Sisana Nkwana from the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, as well as Melusi Kulu, our guest there, the founder of Donda Attorneys. We're going to continue that brown envelope journalism discussion on the other side of this, so do stay with Media and Society. Welcome back to Media and Society with myself, Naledi Molewa. Well, this is our next discussion for the morning. 2 City Press senior journalists are still suspended after allegations of extortion. Reports say they tried to get money from the person they were writing about. Well, in 2021, we read about a Sunday World journalist who was recorded asking for a 1 million rand bribe. The Zondo Commission of Inquiry heard that there are journalists who were paid by the state security agency. So in the past, there are others who have made allegations that brown envelope journalism or checkbook journalism exists in South Africa. So let's unpack that this morning. Joining me is Mr. Wali Mbele, the editor-in-chief of the Sunday World. We're also joined by Behind the News Network editor, Mr. Joe Mhlanga. We invited Media 24 and they said they won't comment beyond their written statement. But let's get into it on this platform, though. Mr. Mhlanga, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I think maybe just to set the scene, really, your understanding of what happened here with these 2 City Press senior journalists. Let's break that story down for the South African.
Look, it's allegations that we have heard that the 2 journalists tried to extort money from the person that they were writing a story about. But it's what we heard from one side of it. Have we heard from them? Have we had time to interrogate and really get all facts forward to say this is what actually happened? Because there's always a danger on what people will say about somebody who might not even be there to answer for themselves. So the interesting fact or the part is to hear how it will unfold or how it will play out, as in the facts in the table for both sides, to actually find out exactly what really happened. Because at this point in time, we were told that they were being suspended based on that. Is that factual? We are yet to hear, we are yet to see. So I wouldn't be, until we get to the crux of the matter, until we get the facts right to say this is what happened. If there's a recording, if there's anything leading up to the evidence that will now be put forward to say this is what actually happened, it will be very difficult now to actually break it down without all facts from all parties.
Are you essentially saying that you feel that perhaps their suspension may have been premature, Joe?
I tend to be careful when it comes to this kind of stories, because it needs to be, we need facts. We need facts. The media of today, there are some papers that you might have been aware. I would really like to mention names where they had series of apologies, there were a series of apologies that they will write and say, we apologize, it was not that. So my point is, we need accuracy in the story, we need facts in the table, we need to know the details of what actually happened. At this point in time, as they were suspended, it's pending investigation, meaning facts needs to be put in the table. So that is why I'm very careful on it. I'm not saying it's not there. I'm saying the fact that they have been suspended, it means pending investigation.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that point is quite clear. But I think what we need to talk about, perhaps, Mr. Mbele, and I'll bring you in here, is whether or not we do have a prevalence of brown envelope journalism in the country. I mean, you've been praised for dealing with a similar case yourself. Are you concerned that we do have a problem with journalists that are paid to write certain stories?
That's exactly where I wanted to go to. I really appreciate the viewpoint from Joe that there's been no finding against these journalists. But to me, the most crucial point is there brown envelope journalism, like you have just posed the question to me? And I want to respond by saying, in my view and in my experience, this is a growing trend within the journalism profession. It's not like it's an isolated kind of an incident that is happening at City Press. Whether those people are going to be, absolved of what they are being accused of is another question. But the fundamental question is, are we dealing with the prevalence of corruption within the newsrooms? Yes, that is happening. It's not happening, only in a few newspapers. But this is something, that is becoming a bit of a cancer within the industry. Remember that the South African National Forum itself went to an extent, of setting up a very detailed, involved inquiry, a very expensive inquiry led by the reputable judge, that is Judge Casey Satchwell. They also published that SANEF, the Editors Forum, wouldn't have launched this investigation, if there was no evidence of this sort of things happening within the industry. So my question to your answer is that yes, it is happening. And it is the responsibilities of individual editors and also collectively, to really sit down, dive into this matter and find creative ways of how they are going to deal with the problem that is emerging within the industry.
Mr. Mbele, let me stay with you and say, you have been praised for how you dealt with a journalist who had asked for a 1 million rand bribe. I mean, take us back there, take the viewer into your confidence and say, this is what you saw and this is how you dealt with it.
First of all, when the allegation was brought to my attention, I wanted evidence first before I could deal with the matter. And evidence was presented to me. It was evidence beyond reasonable doubt. The journalist was confronted with the allegations. The audio recording was handed to the journalist, but he refused to listen to the audio evidence, but preferring, to say he was going to resign from the company. And I said, no, we've got to go through the processes, the disciplinary processes. But the journalist elected not to attend those disciplinary processes, but the process went ahead. Nevertheless, there was a senior advocate who was chairing that process. She was afforded an opportunity to listen to the whole recording, in which the journalist was really captured asking for this massive bribe from the newsmakers. what I'm saying is that the evidence was just massive. The evidence, was such that something had to be done.
Right.
But the most crucial aspect of this, which was important to me and the newspaper, was that we're not going to sit and not make it public, this kind of information.
Right.
Because
I imagine that the reason why you wanted to make it public was because you wanted to uphold the integrity of the publication. Now one wonders
Exactly.
if that has worked, right? And we'll take some calls, 011-714-0661. Do you think that brown envelope journalism has tainted your view of the integrity of the journalistic fraternity? Or do you think that we can still salvage it by bringing some of these stories to you? We'll continue this conversation on the other side of this. Welcome back to Media and Society with myself, Naledi Mulo. We continue our discussion on allegations that brown envelope journalism or checkbook journalism exists in South Africa. Joining me in this discussion is Mr. Walimbele, the editor-in-chief of the Sunday World, and I'm also joined by Behind the News Network editor, Mr. Joe Mhlanga. We did invite Media 24, and they said they won't comment beyond their written statement. This is after the suspension of 2 City Press journalists accused of extorting money from the subject of their piece that they were putting together. Let's come back to you, Joe, for a moment and say, quite often, especially on this platform, we hear it talked about that journalists simply aren't paid enough. And perhaps this is the motivation behind some of these actions, right? I mean, is that good enough of an excuse?
No, it's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. You are becoming a traitor in the profession, and the profession of journalism has been tainted with a lot of people that are within. We always say people are using their stomach trading for their profession, because we see this. We're just having a discussion now that one story will have 2 different angles. It's up to us as editors to question, to say, how do we have different angles for the same story? Because one is trying to spin, to benefit themselves after that. So I think that they're underpaid is not an excuse. But look, we have seen some media people writing certain stories about certain department, and then months later they're employed in the government departments. So it's so big. Now you start to go back and look at the trends on how certain stories were written with certain departments. Now the next person is a spokesperson in the very same department. Now you start to question, how did we get there? So, and Ubrawan has indicated that from his side, there were evidence if everything else was there. So I think that gave him a teeth to be able to deal with that specifically. So, but the fact that people will say they're underpaid is not an excuse in trading your profession for money or to spin stories or to benefit certain individuals.
Yeah.
No, because later the truth comes out, and you will never ever be trusted anywhere you will go, based on the fact that you traded the truth for money. So it's not an excuse.
Yeah, this is where I think it becomes very difficult for editors, right? Because you're talking about, okay, well, a journalist later on becomes this thing, this position in their careers, and if you trail back the stories that they'd written, you're starting to see the dots connecting. At the time that those dots are still being drawn in the sand, are there ways, Ndadewali, for you as the editor to be able to see these things? I mean, we get into the newsroom in the morning, we sit down for our diary meeting, I pitch you my story. Can you then at that point see or start to see the red flags that Naledi may be trying to angle the story in a particular way?
It's how we interrogate stories, the processes of checks and balances, how do we do our accuracy tests on the stories? They may differ from one newsroom to another. And also the editors, they've got the responsibility of demanding all the evidence, that is being presented when the story is in the process of being put together right up to the production process. Like Joe was intimating now, that, I had at some stage a story that was based on a document, on the NPA document. But the way the story was presented to my journalists by the sources, it was somehow, painting the picture that the NPA was actually intimidating the witnesses. When I demanded the documents, we actually checked the veracity of the information in the affidavits, in all the documentation that was made available to the journalists. I actually found out that, no, this is not true. It's a lie that has been leveled against the NPA, but the journalists did not do enough to interrogate the whole document, only concentrated on the angle the people were trying to spin on the document. Maybe I should also go back to the question of whether the journalists are doing this because they are not paid enough in the newsroom. No, I also, like Joe, I also don't buy that argument because the people who have been implicated thus far happen to be senior journalists. Most of senior journalists in the newsroom who are being paid well. It's not junior journalists. So that argument, or the view that is because they are not being paid well cannot be true. What is very important.
What then do we do, Ndatimbele? And I'm gonna let me come back to you, Joe, for the final bite. But I need a minute each from each of you. Joe, what do we do? How do we get rid of the bad apples? Do we need to start vetting our journalists?
Yes, we need to start vetting our journalists. Also, it's a function of the management of that publication to ensure that the credibility is restored and truth and facts and checks and balances are there. But I must also indicate that if that media...
Okay, I'm losing your sound there. And I'm sorry for that, Joe, but I need to do this because I think almost that was just perfect, actually, because we've got a caller on the line. Ledwaba's on the line in Mpumalanga. Ledwaba, good morning to you, Baba. Thank you so much for calling.
Morning, ma'am.
Yes, what are your thoughts?
I concur with the subject of media envelope. These media envelope issues are taking place in Mpumalanga province. I can attest to that. Even those who are working on televisions, I'm speaking on the issue that I've got an issue whereby I'm fighting the Deputy President of South Africa. I've been in High Court in Mpumalanga several times. You hardly see my story on that because journalists ask me, this is a high-profile person.
Okay.
They don't want to. They even refuse to come to court and tell the world the pain that I'm undergoing. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, media journalists in Mpumalanga, both print and media, some of them are taking bribes.
Okay.
For instance,
I'm gonna have to stop it there, Mr. Ledwaba. I really want to hear this, and we're happy to take you offline as well to take the discussion further, but I'm out of time. But it's certainly an important discussion that reminds us of the importance of having ethical journalists, and like Mr. Ledwaba is doing, the importance of speaking out when you see unethical journalism, because our job is to bring you the information that you need to be hearing, not the information that people want us to tell you. Remember, let's continue this conversation on social media, hashtag SABC Media Society. Thank you so much to my guest, Mr. Mbele of the Sunday World, as well as Joe Mhlala there, who is the editor of Behind the News Network. Have yourselves a fabulous Sunday.